Hey guys, how's it going? Tomorrow is the first official day of CES, but companies like to announce things beforehand, and today was nothing new. Nvidia announced a couple new GPUs today, and at first I was a little skeptical because they looked virtually identical to what is already out on the market. For example, if we're looking at the 4070 Ti, a card that everybody complained about when it came out. It was a little bump from the 4070 in terms of shader cores, in terms of ray tracing cores, in terms of tensor cores, but it didn't have any more VRAM. Yes, it had more VRAM than the 3070, but if we're talking about the 3070 had 8 gigs of GDDR6 RAM. Like the VRAM in it is very little in terms of what we're looking for today. It's enough to do the basics and play games at a decent frame rate, but if you're trying to go for 4K, it will not do anything. You are going to be struggling and you're going to be limited in the amount of frames that you can generate and store for the GPU to do work on. This is because a lot of developers aren't optimizing their games necessarily for PCs because they know that you'll just brute force it. If we take a look at the 3080 has 12 gigs of VRAM, or 10 depending on which one you got. 30 teraflops on the Ampere shader core. But I think I found the card that I'm going to be getting. The 4070 Ti Super has 44 teraflops on that shader core. If we go over to the ray tracing cores, it's a second generation of their RT core at 58 teraflops. Jumping back to the 4070 Ti Super, the most ridiculous name they could have put on that, by the way. But that has their new third gen cores at 102 teraflops. And then if we jump back to AI, the tensor cores, the third gen cores on the 3080, you're looking at 238 of those AI tensor cores. However, on the 4070 Ti Super, you're looking at 706 of their new 4th gen AI cores. The 3080 still has a great NVENC encoder. The 7th gen NVENC encoder is plenty fine. The 4070 Ti Super though has 2 of their new 8th gen encoders that can also encode an AV1. And the cherry on top is that it has 16 gigs of GDDR6X. Actually, no. Let me really rephrase that. The cherry on top is that it is $799. This is actually, if the card comes out and it is actually this price, it straight up is going to be the replacement for the 3080. That's not necessarily a good thing. That means that we have jumped up yet another price bracket with these cards. They have gone from, oh, this is a top tier card that you're paying $800 for, to the top tier card is still $1,200. Now with this one, it's still $1,000. The 4080 Super is another spec bump, and it is starting at $999. But who knows with the amount of scalping that is going to happen, because it always inevitably happens. Who knows what this price is actually going to be when this card hits people's houses. The thing is though, I don't see that big of a difference personally from the 4080 Super compared to the 4070 Ti Super. Oh my god, that name is horrible. If you break down the numbers, that's 20% for $200. You get 20% extra performance for another $200. Yeah, and from what I'm seeing online, the first test results of the 4070 Super versus the 4070 Ti is only a 5 to 7% difference. Yeah, my honest opinion on this is that the only card that Nvidia is going to be pumping out of their doors worth considering right now is going to be the 4070 Ti Super. That name is god awful. I hate it so much. You know what? I actually have a way that they could ruin that even further. They could just end every single one of their cards with either the VRAM variant or, better yet, the tensor core count. So you see 4th gen 706 at the end of this, so it would be 4070 Ti Super 4th gen 706. Yikes. Like, that unironically took me almost 3 seconds to say. 3 whole seconds to say that name. Yeah, the 10% faster 4070 Ti with a little bit more VRAM makes so much more sense. Yeah, and the reason why I bring up those tensor cores and why that would be something that Nvidia would want to bring up is because that's what they're really pushing. If you look at what they are really doing with these cards, it just looks like they've just given a little bit of a spec bump, right? But more than 50 cores from the previous version is not necessarily the biggest spec bump in the world, but they're really trying to get people like me, aka a sucker, to upgrade. And they know that because they're going all in on their frame generation and building out extra frames for you, that you're going to want this. So let me break that down a little bit more. The AI cores in the 4070 Ti Super, I still hate it. That name is atrocious. But anyways, these new AI cores, they are designed to handle calculations and operations that are pretty complex, like language processing, image recognition, and of course, real-time ray tracing. So these cards aren't necessarily going to be revolutionary, they're just going to be more efficient at what they're already doing. Whether you like the generation of frames or you want quote-unquote natural frames to be generated. In my opinion, frames are frames. If I can get 300 frames in a game for free, why would I not want to turn on that setting? NVIDIA's building these tools for a reason, and they're starting to pay off. The history of NVIDIA's frame generation technology can be traced back to the introduction of its deep learning super sampling, or DLSS. In 2018, DLSS was shown off and was shown to be an AI-powered image upscaling technology that allows for higher frame rates and improved image quality in games. In 2020, they introduced DLSS 2.0, which significantly improved the image quality and performance of the technology. 2.0 was widely adopted by game developers and became a popular feature among gamers. And most recently in 2022, NVIDIA announced their DLSS 3, which introduced a new feature called frame generation. This technology uses AI to generate entire frames in real time, resulting in even higher frame rates and smoother gameplay. DLSS 3 also includes improved image quality and support for new features such as ray tracing. Since its introduction, NVIDIA's frame generation technology has been pretty well received by gamers and has become a key feature in the company's graphics cards. So much so that NVIDIA doesn't consider themselves a GPU company anymore. They are an AI company. And these commercial GPUs aren't the first time that AI has been the one thing NVIDIA has been wanting to pursue. NVIDIA has been a huge part of AI research for over a decade. There was one phrase that they talked about today that really struck me, and it was 7 out of every 8 pixels is AI generated. And it's something that made me think for a while, but if you have DLSS on, those are generated frames. Even if they aren't completely generated, part of that frame is generated because you are upscaling using AI generation. With the technology advancing so much and monitors and displays advancing at the same time, we are starting to look at a future where games are going to look really good, regardless of what you're playing. My real big hope for all of this, though, is that we get less artifacting. Because right now, that is exactly what is happening in these generated frames, is they are artifacting. If you are taking a wholly generated frame, it is estimating what is going on. Yes, it may be fast enough now that you won't even notice, but it's still going to have that ghosting effect in really, really, really demanding games. And NVIDIA still refuses to show their current gen versus the one that they just released. Or better yet, natural frame generation with the card itself without AI turned on versus the last version without AI turned on and just natural frame generating from the card. They won't do it. I think it's because they know that the generational performance increase doesn't exist unless they are doubling these cores physically. And that's why I think the 4070 Ti Super, I hate that name so much, but it looks like it's going to be a great card. It looks like it's not only going to be something that is, one, a generational improvement, like genuinely a generational improvement, but it's also going to have enough VRAM and be able to do the ray tracing thing, the AI thing. It's going to be able to do the actual shader core thing. And it has AV1 looking pretty good. See, the thing about VRAM, though, is you don't need it until you do. Having too much VRAM is worthless, but not having enough is detrimental. So this card having 16 gigs is enough for the very demanding games, but it's also not too much. So yeah, this is Worm Sponge signing out. I am looking at new GPUs, and they're looking actually pretty good. Peace.